the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of God. You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. Good morning. Howdy. Man. We got out of the car this morning and I got here with Obs and she jumps out and yells, I'm so excited to be back at church. And you know, we can be pedantic and like, actually, the church is the people, and we never stopped gathering, and yada, yada, yada. But there's something wonderfully refreshing about the consistency of gathering in a place together. Like routine is comforting, especially when the world is chaotic. You understand what I'm saying? And hopefully you get that. So it's really, really good to be back with you today, even though it's weird, even though like we're all spread out and things are not quite the same yet. It is a blessing to be back here. We're in Matthew chapter 5, if you want to turn in your Bibles there. It's the Sermon on the Mount, and I wanted to take chapter 5 and break it up into two pieces. We did the first half a couple of weeks ago when we were with our MCs. Just want to say really quick, last week, our first week back, Friday night, Saturday morning, one of our kids got a fever. And so like we went and did the COVID test. We had to wait a few days until we got the results back. So we weren't able to be here. Special thanks to Bobby, who I called at like 1 o'clock Saturday afternoon and asked if he would be able to prepare a sermon for Sunday. And he did a great job. We got to watch it on the live stream. We're still figuring stuff out. If somebody texts you about, hey, what's going on with the live stream? It's not working. I don't know why. But it's one of those things, you know, like we're just going to roll with it. It's recording, so we can post it afterwards. For whatever reason, it's not streaming. But like as we figured this stuff out, you know, it's good to be back together. It's good to be in Matthew. And we're here in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. We just finished the Beatitudes. We talked through the Beatitudes. We talked through, you know, being the salt of the earth, being the light of the world. And he finishes there in verse 16, in the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. And he's going to take that thought, and now he's going to say, here's what that looks like, all right? Be careful not to disconnect 16 from 17 and following. Because what he's saying is, they'll see your good works. Here's what that is going to look like. Our big idea for today, Ari, if you can put our big idea up here. The Sermon on the Mount isn't just about how to behave. It's about discovering the living God in the loving and dying Jesus and learning to reflect that love ourselves into the world that needs it so badly. All right, this is from Scott McKnight. He has a whole commentary, not on Matthew, but actually on the Sermon on the Mount from chapters 5 to 7. And so I stole this from him. I'm not taking credit for it. But it encapsulates this passage just so well. I wanted to use it for my big idea. When it comes to like these kind of good works that we're talking about, a lot of times we want to contrast it with just basic legalism, and I think that's what Jesus is going to do here. And as an example, I don't know if you've ever watched the musical or read the book Les Miserables, right? There have been several versions of it. Maybe you saw it on Broadway. Maybe you actually read the Victor Hugo novel. Anybody read the Victor Hugo novel? All right, yeah. Maybe you saw the one with Liam Neeson that wasn't a musical at all, but was still pretty good, right? Or then the one with Hugh Jackman and for some reason Russell Crowe. I still watch that, and everything is amazing. And then, no offense to Russell Crowe, he's a great actor, but the idea there is there's this countercultural nature to how they operate, how morality operates, right? Javert is this, he's this police officer, he's this chief of police who is all about the rules. And you broke the rules, you stole the bread, you are branded as a criminal forever. That is who you are, and we are going to follow the rules. And then, man, I lost his name, the main character. Jean Valjean, right? Jean Valjean is kind of the opposite, and he's the opposite because he experiences the opposite of that. If you remember, there is this critical point in the movie, in the play, where he gets out of prison, but nobody will hire him, no one will give him lodging, he is essentially homeless, and he finds refuge in a church. And what happens when he leaves there and he takes all of their candlesticks, right? He's caught by the police, he's taken back, and instead of the priest saying, you broke the rules, here are the consequences, here's what's going to happen to you, back to prison labor for you forever, the priest tells him what? Oh, you forgot all the silverware. You left, I gave you that, and you forgot to take all this silverware with you. Take this, and I want you to go and use this to become a different kind of person. And what does he do? He becomes a different kind of person. So his life is now marked by blessing. His life is marked by caring for the oppressed around him, right? And Javert is constantly at his heels saying, here are the rules, we are going to follow them. These two different ways of operating in the world are what we run into here in Matthew chapter 5. All right, so Matthew chapter 5, he starts out, and this gets really, it can get very confusing. I want to be careful not to confuse you right off the bat. Verse 17, all right, go ahead and put verse 17 up there. Don't misunderstand why I have come, right? This is the New Living Translation. I think we read it from the ESV this morning. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose. If you read in the ESV, it says, I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them, all right? We have this really weird relationship with the Old Testament, don't we? We like to read it. We love the stories. When it comes to a lot of the laws and commandments and feasts and sacrifices, it feels very distant to us. And it's very easy to think of the Old and New Testament as this one's gone and done, and this one is brand new and something completely different. And Jesus here is saying, that's not what I'm trying to do. And he was accused of this a lot. All right? When it talks about fulfilling or accomplishing, what it means, McKnight says it this way, to fulfill or complete means history has come to its fulfillment in Jesus himself. That is in his life, death, resurrection, and exaltation, and in his teaching. He is claiming that he fulfills in a salvation, historical, theological, and moral manner what the Torah and the prophets anticipated and predicted and preliminarily taught. In other words, everything is leading up to Jesus, and he is their fulfillment. He is accomplishing all of their purposes. I don't know if you're familiar with the Jesus Storybook Bible, right? Whenever we do a baby dedication, right, we just gave a Jesus Storybook Bible to the families that we did baby dedications for, right? What is the main idea in the Jesus Storybook Bible? Comes up over and over again. Anybody know? He's the hero, or how do they put it? Every story whispers his name, right? And that is essentially what Jesus is saying here. You know, all those sacrifices, you know what their purpose was? Their purpose was to point to me and show what I am going to do and accomplish for you. You know what the Sabbath was for? It was to teach you to rest until you find complete rest in me. You know what those feasts were for? It was to mark you out as a community that was to be the light of the world, the salt of the earth, until I came and fulfilled all of that. Right? So Jesus comes, he's not abolishing, but he's fulfilling. And that's where we get the idea of every story whispers his name. What do we mean by that? We mean that Jesus is the fulfillment of all of it. He goes on, he's talking about, truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until it's accomplished. Whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. And then he says something that sounds really difficult. All right, verse 20, Ari, give us verse 20 there. I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. That sounds difficult, all right? The Pharisees were famous for following the religious codes, right? In fact, not only did they follow the commandments, they built rules on top of the commandments in order to keep them from breaking the commandments, right? So what's happening here is like they've got all these rules. Like there's the Sabbath law that says you can't work on the Sabbath. So what do? Well, we got to have a rule about what it means to work. All right. So work is like you can't carry your bedroll outside of your house. You can carry it around inside your house, but you can't carry it outside your house. That would constitute work. Write that one down. If you pick grain, like if you harvest your wheat on the Sabbath, that's work, and you can't do that. So we're going to write that law down. And what happens when Jesus comes? What the Pharisees were known for is getting into the minutia of these laws. And when Jesus comes along, what does he do? He challenges them. It sounds really hard, like your righteousness, your covenant obedience needs to exceed the Pharisees. But when he comes along, he's saying that's not a high bar, that's actually a low bar. Because you Pharisees are terrible at this. He comes along and he meets a man who is lame by the pool of Siloam, who is lame, cannot walk, and wants to experience a miracle, but he has nobody to help him. And what does he do? On the Sabbath, he says, take up your bed and walk. And what does the guy do? He takes up his bed and he walks. He performs this miracle. And guess what? The guy is carrying his bed outside his home on the Sabbath. Not cool. And the Pharisees come to him and they're like, who told you to do that? Why are you doing that? And he's like, I don't know who it was, but I used to not be able to walk and now I can walk. And he told me to carry this, and so that's what I'm doing. That's essentially the conversation he has with the Pharisees. So now the Pharisees are like, who is this guy that is breaking our rules and telling people it's okay to work on the Sabbath? And Jesus' basic response to them is, you're forgetting what all this is for. Like, you followed the minutia of the law, but you missed the fact that there was this lame man begging for food with nobody to help him. What are you doing? We get to, Jesus is calling out the Pharisees. He has this long passage where he's yelling at the Pharisees in Matthew 23. And he says, woe to you scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You tithe out of your herb gardens. Okay, so they have these herb gardens. I don't know if you have herb gardens. They're not very big. They don't produce very much. But what the Pharisees would do is they would take their mint and their cumin, and they would weigh it out on the scale, and they'd make sure, got to get 10%. Got to send that over to the priest at the temple. Like, that's my duty. I'm following it. What does he say? You tithe mint and dill and cumin, and you have neglected the weightier matters of the law. What are the weightier matters of the law that Jesus says they neglected? You neglected justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglect. Like, it's fine that you want to tithe from your herb garden, but don't forget to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with your God. Like, you forgot what's actually important by following the minutia. Last example. Jesus in Luke 20, he's talking about the scribes who desire to go around in long robes. They love greetings in the marketplace, the best seats in the synagogues, the best places of feasts. But what do? They devour widows' houses, and for a pretense, they make long prayers. They're going to receive a greater condemnation. And then he looks over, and right at that moment, you know what he sees? He sees a widow giving a tiny bit of money into the offering box. Every time I've heard this passage preached, it's all about you're supposed to give sacrificially. That's not what this passage is about at all. Okay? Here Jesus is saying, you Pharisees, you are wealthy, wearing your long robes and beautiful stuff, and you forget about the widows. Look at this widow. She is giving everything she has. She's giving more than any of you. It is a condemnation on the Pharisees and scribes who have failed to do justice and love mercy and take up the cause of the widow. And then what does he follow that with? As some spoke of the temple, it was adorned with beautiful stones and donations. They're like, well, yeah, look at how beautiful our temple is. And what does he say? The days will come in which not one stone will be left on another that will not be thrown down. I'm going to tear this whole thing down. You think this is beautiful? You think that God is really concerned with all of the gold and all of that? When you are ignoring the plight of this widow, she is giving, you should be taking care of her, and she is taking care of you. I am going to tear this whole place down. When Jesus says, your righteousness needs to exceed the righteousness of the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, it doesn't mean we need to get into the minutia and make sure we're following all the rules like the Pharisees did. Do you see that? It means we need to be concerned with what Jesus is actually concerned with. We need to have the heart of Christ instead of the legalism that wraps itself up in these rules. So, as we go through the rest of the passage, what I want you to remember is Jesus is not giving you a list of rules that you need to now build your life around. He's saying, here is what my covenant community will look like. Here is what it looks like to be part of my covenant membership. And it's important. Covenant membership for the Pharisees, for the Israelites, meant following the law, doing the feast, offering sacrifices. We get really confused about they had to do this in order to be saved, and we make it about salvation and justification. And really it's about, here is me demonstrating what it means to be part of the covenant. And because we miss that, we forget that there are things for us in the new covenant that demonstrate that we are members of the new covenant. What does it look like to be part of the new covenant? And that's where we're going to get to in the rest of the passage. All right, Ari, you can go to the next slide, which I think that's all the slides I have. Yep, okay, thank you. So verse 21 to 26, he's going to do these thesis antithesis statements, right? He's going to say something, and then he's going to basically come back and say, you have heard it said, but I say unto you, right? Thesis antithesis. Starting in verse 21, you've heard it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. Whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say that everyone who's angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. Whoever says you fool will be liable to hellfire. So if you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. When we read these, remember, it's very easy to turn these into rules that we have to be very careful to follow. So it's very easy to be like, oh, you called somebody a fool, you're going to hell. That says it right here. It's not the idea. What he's saying, and he's using a lot of hyperbole in this passage. We're going to see even more hyperbole. What he's saying is, my community will be marked out by people seeking reconciliation. All right? Reconciliation is more important than offerings, and it's a path to diffusing anger. He's saying, listen, if you hate your brother, it's not good enough that you just, stop short of murdering him. It's not good enough for you to be like, I hate that guy, I can't stand him, I'm going to do everything I can to make his life miserable, but I'm not going to kill him. That's what the law says. I am following the law, and I'm not killing this guy that I hate so much. Jesus says, listen, you are to be people of reconciliation. You are to go to someone who has something against you and offer reconciliation. In fact, save your sacrifices and offerings. And if you get to the altar and you're like, oh man, I remember this, I have this anger against this person, or I know he has this anger against me, I would rather you be reconciled than you offer up your sacrifice. The community of God, the kingdom community is meant to be marked out by reconciliation. Verse 27, you've heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out, throw it away. It's better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away, for it's better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. All right. When it comes to the topic of lust, right, we have these two commandments related to this in the Old Testament. One, thou shalt not commit adultery. Two, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, right? Jesus is saying here, essentially, when you are objectifying women for your own pleasure, like you are not recognizing the fact that she is made in the image of God and treating her as such, okay? And if you're going to do that, I would rather, and he puts all the onus on the men. Patriarchal societies have always gone the other direction, right? We need to cover up the women, like let's put them in burqas, or let's make sure that their skirts are below the knees, and one person at our school is going to be in charge of measuring the skirts and make sure that, they're not showing too much leg, and, your shirt's a little too low, I need you to go home and change, all right? We put all of the onus on women. And where does Jesus put it? If you lust after a woman, just gouge your eye out. Just do it. Like if it's a problem, just take it out. And it's interesting that he uses the right eye. We don't really understand this because our culture is a little bit different. But back then, the right eye signified like status and respect. And so if you wanted to actually really demoralize and disrespect your enemy, you would gouge out their right eye. And what he's saying is, step down from your position of power and privilege. Like take out, your eye to show that you are humbling yourself and recognizing the other person as an equal. All right? So don't objectify women. Don't treat them as objects for your own pleasure. I would rather you humiliate yourself and offer yourself up as their equal to show that they are made in the image of God as well. Okay? The problem is not beauty, but objectification of a woman in the female body so that it becomes an object of self-satisfying pleasure for the male. He is calling us out, men. 31, 32. We could probably spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to say a couple things and then move on. It's talking about divorce. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Okay. Just make sure you understand. In the Old Testament, in the Jewish culture, if a man didn't want to be married to his wife, all he had to do was write a certificate of divorcement saying, I release you from our marriage, essentially. You can go marry somebody else. I just have to give you the certificate, and I can do it for whatever reason I want. And Jesus is coming along and saying, you have missed what marriage is actually about. Marriage is supposed to be this picture of the loving faithfulness of God. Like the covenant faithfulness of God is what it's supposed to picture, and you have missed that. He's not saying you should never divorce for any reason. He's saying you have misunderstood what marriage is. Okay? So like when it comes down to real people and real situations, we need to be careful, one, that we're not placing a burden on people who have experienced divorce. And two, that we are not just going along with our culture and saying divorce is okay for anything, right? There's kind of this middle ground that we have to, walk this fine line and say, we are committed to marriage, which means this, but we also understand, this is what life looks like. And Paul does this too. Paul expands, when he talks about divorce, he actually expands Jesus' exception. So a couple things about divorce. Churches and pastors and followers of Jesus are challenged by these words to recommit themselves to the covenant nature of love and to marriage as a sacred union blessed and established by God. Secondly, we have an obligation as followers of Jesus of holding in balance the twin non-negotiable virtues of mercy and righteousness. Okay? How do we offer mercy to real people in real situations? How do we also uphold an ethic of marriage that demonstrates covenant faithfulness? We have to be committed to both of those and not give up one over the other. All right, I'm going to hurry. Verse 33. Again, we can talk more about it. If you have any questions, I've had people ask me, like, what does the church think about divorce? Let's sit down and talk about that. There's a lot that we could say. And Scott McKnight in his commentary really does a great job, I think. 33, again, you've heard it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. I say to you, don't even take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it's the throne of God, by earth, for it's his footstool, by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king. And don't take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. In other words, we have structured society where we don't actually know if someone's telling us the truth or not. And so we have to take all these oaths because I don't know if you're actually being honest with me, right? So we have, like in our culture, in our legal culture, we have this, you put your right hand on the Bible. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I swear. We have this whole process. Why? Because we are not normally known for being truthful with each other. I was watching a show, Ted Lasso, and in his relationship with his wife, like they went to counseling, they had this technique where if you want absolute honesty from the other person, you say this one code word. And for them, it was Oklahoma, right? If you said Oklahoma, the other person had to be completely honest about what they were thinking. Why do you need that? Because we are not by nature very honest people, right? And Jesus here is saying, you need to develop a culture where oaths aren't even necessary. You don't need to swear by God. You don't need to swear by earth, because guess what? When you swear by earth, you're still swearing by God. When you swear by Jerusalem, guess what? That's the city of the great king. You're still, like, anything you say, God is a witness to. And so let your yes be yes, let your no be no. It's easy to come here and be like, oh, I can never testify in court because I'm not allowed to take an oath. That's not what it's saying. You think I'm joking. That's not what it's saying. It's saying develop a community where truthfulness is the norm, where you are radically honest with each other. 38 to 42. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone would sue you, take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. All right. What we want to see here is Jesus is telling us to show mercy and unravel the system of retribution that pervades our society. The Old Testament law of lex talionis, the eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, was a restrainer against evil. So if somebody does something to me, I am within my rights to do the same thing back to them, but I can't do more. All right? Somebody cuts off my hand, I can cut off their hand, but I can't kill him. Right? Jesus is saying, I want you to be people that show mercy, even to the evil ones around you. When he says, if somebody asks you to go 1 mile, go with him 2, there is a ton of historical, cultural baggage there. The Roman government was the occupying force in Israel at the time, and one of the rules in the Roman government was any Roman soldier could tell any Jewish person, I want you to carry my things for 1 mile. The law was he could not ask them to go more, okay? So they're not being overly abusive, but they do have these rights over the Jewish people. What is Jesus telling them then? If your oppressor comes and says, I'm going to require you to follow the law and carry my things for 1 mile, go with him 2. Carry your oppressor's weapons an extra mile just to show him how radically kind you are. This is the kind of community that we're developing, that we are marked by. Show mercy and unravel this system of retribution that pervades our society. We are going to subvert society with kindness. And it sounds ridiculous, and it sounds like this will never work. I'm a realist, right? But Jesus is saying this is how my community is going to work. Last of all, 43 to 47. I'll finish quickly. You've heard it said, you will love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven, for he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. If you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Don't the tax collectors do the same thing? If you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same thing? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. What does it mean to love our enemy McKnight defines it this way: love is a rugged commitment to be with someone as someone who is for that person's good and to love them unto God's formative purpose. And the key question here is, how are you turning your enemies into your neighbors? You are called to love God and love your neighbor, and we always want to put conditions on that. The person who asked Jesus that question immediately followed up with, well, who's my neighbor? How do I qualify that? And Jesus here is saying, you need to be in the process of turning your enemies into your neighbor. Why do we struggle to believe this? We rationalize our disobedience to the Sermon on the Mount because it's really hard. We make excuses about it. Like I remember theologians saying, it's not really for right now. The kingdom of heaven is like to come. And so what Jesus is saying, he's offering it to the Jews, but they reject it. So we're going to wait until he returns in order for this to be a reality. That is not how Jesus meant it, okay? Jesus actually meant for us to be a community that is marked out by this. It's easy for us to rationalize our disobedience to it. And instead of like taking it as this is what a community marked out by Christ will look like, we turn it into these rules, and we do the same thing the Pharisees do. We make it into minutia. How do I follow this? I can't take oaths. I can never be a boxer because I'd have to turn my other cheek to the guy. And right? You think this like it's hilarious, but at the same time, I've heard people say things like this. I can never do that because Matthew 5, the minutia says this. That's not what it's saying. How is Jesus the hero? Jesus demonstrates the ethic of the Sermon on the Mount. When he says, if somebody strikes you on the right cheek, give to them your left, guess what he did? He actually went and gave them his other cheek. When they hit him, he didn't strike back, he didn't respond, he let them hit him again, right? When they took his cloak, he gave to them his coat also, right? When they said to, carry your cross, he carried it as far as he physically could. He refused to retaliate. Even like loving your enemies, when they actually nailed him to the cross and put it up there, what did he do? He could have called judgment down on them, but instead he's like, oh, Father, forgive these guys. They don't know what they're doing. Like Jesus is the perfect demonstration of this ethic. And then Jesus gives us the Spirit. He invites us to participate in the kingdom of heaven together with him, right? If you look at this and you're like, man, my life just doesn't measure up to this. Like, that's okay. None of us really do. But what we want to do is build a community that is working together towards that, right? You yourself don't need to be perfect at this. We are developing a community where we are consistently pushing each other in this direction. And someday when Jesus returns, we'll get there. Okay? Let's do our communion and be reminded of the basis on which we can do all of this. Do we have the call to communion up here?